It shouldn't
Yeah.
happen. There's no circumstance I can think of except extreme emergencies where a plane should be hitting a stationary object.
Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
So, the East Wing of the White House will cost us. Trump had previously indicated that renovations to the East Wing of the White House were going to be entirely covered by private donations. Meanwhile, he tore it down, and it seemed like he was tearing it down on a whim. Who knows how long it had actually been planned, but the story he told was, oh, I decided I said to him, how soon can we start? And they said, sir, we can start tonight. There's no zoning. One of his stories. But now, Republicans in Congress want to fund it to the tune of $1 billion. Although $1 billion just in the abstract for a government building as important as the White House may not be very much, since it's a big national symbol, the real issue, that I see it at least, is the principle of how Trump has gone about this. AOC said they destroyed the East Wing of the White House without any notice or consent in the dead of night, and to me that sums it up pretty well. This is another example of the U.S. getting taken for a ride by the current administration. Is AOC correct?
Yes and no. So she's correct in the sense that the Trump administration did say that they were going to privately fund the ballroom, but the money would be applied to more than just the ballroom, right? So it's everything underneath the ballroom. So this is a semantic distinction that I think is super important in this conversation because this is pretty common for past monuments and buildings the US government makes where they do public private partnerships. The Washington Monument, the Vietnam Memorial, the there's a whole list. One of the first railroads made was a combination of private donation and then public oversight of government monies. And so what happens is that you have the initial upfront cost is funded maybe by private donors, but the maintenance, the repairs, the security, the oversight, all that costs. And when you're talking about something like the White House, it's a national security issue because it's a potential target, which means that he needs to be fortified for every building on the White House, and that costs money. Around the clock, soldiers and troops and weapons and ammo. The list goes on and on. And so I don't think that AOC is being completely fair in this respect because remember, the people who oversee DC and who have to appropriate for virtually all security are Congress. They're the ones. They control the District of Columbia, right? They're the ones that have to directly appropriate money to it. And so it would be foolish to build a ballroom with private money, but then spend no money to protect it, right? And the job of protecting government property falls on the government. So the government has to appropriate. At least on this particular uh, issue, I'm more on the side of the appropriations, setting aside money right now in advance for all the stuff they're going to need because they will need that money, right? At the end of the day, there is no escaping that reality. If it's part of the White House, it has to be protected because of the symbolic nature, but also because of the real operational nature of the role it serves in the US government. There is no way around that, right? State leaders visit the White House. They have to be assured that it's safe to visit, right? And the way you provide that assurance, you say, look, we're spending all this money, both from private donation to build it, but then from our own coffers, right? We're ponying up the money from our own appropriations process, which this is, right? They're putting the money in an appropriations bill to protect government property, especially the most important properties that we have. So at least in this regard, I don't think this is that controversial. It seems so superficially, right? It seems like a bait and switch where they say, "Oh, we'll just fund the whole ballroom," but where it gets fishy is only if they don't apply the private money towards the ballroom and they just pocket it or something. But if they use both the private money and the public money for the ballroom, nothing. There's nothing super controversial for me here.
Okay, so is it not a thing? Is it an infeasibility? Let's say, if because they're already chipping in for the ballroom, the private donors. If you can't just set some of that money aside, if it's security measures underneath the East Wing, that has to be funded by the government. Is that what I'm hearing here?
So the problem actually is just the continuing oversight and funding. You cannot expect that
Ah.
private philanthropy will pay for continuous payments and care. So $1 billion may seem like a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, if you remember the DoD requests that they're making for funding, they want $1.5 trillion. So this is a drop in that particularly large bucket of money in terms of what it precisely they're asking for. Because remember, it is a national security issue, which means that the military has to be involved in some respect in terms of defense. Because I guess technically the Capitol Police could protect the White House, but that's not generally how I understand that it works. It's the Treasury with the Secret Service, and then because one wing of the White House, and it's not entirely clear what wing, but at least some portions of the White House are part of the military, right? They have military command capabilities within the White House, which means that some measure of the building has to be protected by military assets. And so the point isn't that private philanthropy funds it. Of course, that's how he said he was going to do it. It's what happens after. And if you don't think about what happens after, you're left with a different kind of problem, right? Which is a security vulnerability, and that's not good. A security vulnerability is not good for the safety and security of the country. Because look, remember, what's the purpose of the Secret Service? Why was it created? It was created in part to not have markets collapse, right? Why is it the Department of the Treasury that runs the Secret Service? It's because the economy is so intrinsically tied to the stability of the country, right? And that's, if you look at the history of why it came to be, my thinking is the same thing here, right? That this ballroom ostensibly would be used to host things like state dinners, right? Imagine the catastrophe it would be if like leaders of other countries showed up at a dinner and it wasn't safeguarded enough. That's the issue here. So that's why I think that there's a conversation at least about appropriating more money for the fortification and safeguarding of the ballroom. That's my thinking.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I agree that $1 billion is not a lot for the security of the government apparatus as it pertains to the East Wing, because as you say, the primary, you didn't exactly say this, but this leads into this, the primary asset of the United States, and when we are at our best, we are taking advantage of stability. Like, stability is necessary for economy, for security, for a lot of things. So $1 billion, it's really not that much in terms of that. We've discussed previously about how the process or getting the necessary buy-in for this remodeling, that wasn't there necessarily, but now here we are.
So that's yeah, so that's what I would also say as well, right? This is through the legislative process. The Republicans are proposing this in legislation, which means it's subject to debate, right? And then they vote on it. That's democracy, right? That is at its most basic democracy in action. I don't think the process for destroying the East Wing was very democratic. That was almost unilateral, right? There should have been some kind of discussion. Like, here's my question: why did a portion of the White House have to be destroyed to have a ballroom? Why not just add a ballroom, right? That's my question in all this: is why do you have to destroy to make something else? Because the East Wing also was a historical monument, right? It served as a kind of, remember, the White House isn't just a place that people live, it's also a place that people work, but it's also a historical monument. It's effectively a museum of a huge amount of American artifacts and history. And so when you destroy parts of it, you're effectively dismantling history. And so the question I have in all that was, why did that have to happen at all? Same with the Rose Garden. Why do you have to pave over the Rose Garden to put in something else? Why not just add something else somewhere else that's not the Rose Garden? Like, why did things have to be destroyed of this living history place that is a national monument, that's the people's house that the American government owns, and by extension, therefore, the taxpayers? Why do you have to destroy any of it? Just add things somewhere right? Build up, build around.
Yeah, I have my suspicions, but a little bit of a meme here. East Wing, what were you like in the 2010s? Have you seen these? Have you
No,
seen these memes?
no,
You haven't
I
seen these
haven't.
memes. They're pretty nostalgia-rific, but it's like such and such, what were you like in the 90s? And then they play a song and they show a slideshow. But I have a suspicion as to why he did it, because if the East Wing is gone, then there might be an urgency to put a new one up. If you get rid of the old one, people might say, we got to undo that, or we got to redo it because we tore it down. That would be my suspicion.
I understand. People don't like looking at giant holes in the ground and debris and rubble. I get that. I understand that it's an eyesore, right? That anytime anyone looks at the White House, they're like, why is a portion of it missing and it's just rubble on the ground? That sucks. I
Mm-hmm.
get that. That it's to motivate action faster because DC is notoriously slow for getting anything done, for renovating things, for building things, that it's very bureaucratic and slow. I understand the expediency of it, of wanting to get it done now. But at the end of the day, this is where the controversy does exist, is that the White House doesn't actually belong to Trump. It belongs to the
Mm-hmm.
American people. He's a tenant, right? We hired him to do a job, and he gets to live there and gets to have a level of subsidized living with respect to security, and there's a whole bunch of things that are paid for. But at the end of the day, it's the American people that own it, right? Congress is the one that oversees it and appropriates money for it. And so that's where it gets really controversial, because it's the same deal actually with the removal of those displays in Philadelphia from the national parks, where the judge said this is extremely Orwellian. You are temporary caretakers, the Trump administration, of historical artifacts and museums and history and public property, but you're not there forever, right? And this stuff ostensibly supposed to be for the American public to decide what to do with, and that's the role of Congress. That power is vested in Congress. They decide how to spend money and where to direct the money towards. The executive executes the mandates of Congress, whatever those are, right? In the sense of Congress says spend money in a place, then the president makes sure that the money gets spent there and oversees it to make sure that there's no corruption or graft or criminality involved. But in terms of who gets to say where the money is spent, that falls on Congress. And so the real question here is, and also there's another question about the disposal of the rubble and the debris of the East Wing. Why was there no process really of determining where to safely dispose of this stuff? That was, I found, very confusing when I was reading about the story of what happened, where they offloaded the trash and the rubble from the demolition project. These are all these big questions. What is going on here? Because remember, we're a democracy. We're not a dictatorship. We're not a tyrannical society. There's the whole separation of powers is that there's three co-equal branches of government, and this does not look equal. This looks like one person unilaterally saying goodbye East Wing of the White House and hello new ballroom. And now it looks more co-equal now that Congress is proposing the funding for the ballroom, because at least at a minimum there's more compromise and participation, and there's at least a discussion, right? That elected representatives get to have some kind of say as opposed to no say, right? That's better than nothing. But is this what we want to aspire to for a democracy? There's processes in place for a reason. The reason you have the preservation societies, you make sure if you do something like a demolition, that you're not also damaging all the other stuff, that you're not also damaging the environment, that you're not also damaging. There's a reason you do studies for these things, to make sure that when you do it, it's done in a manner that is competent and effective and doesn't cause more harm than just the demolition of the building. That there's a look before you leap kind of thing. Take a step, take a moment, really think it through. See, maybe he just didn't want permission. Is that it? He just wanted to rush it through and then get it done, because if you get it done, you can't undo it, right? I get that if he just wanted to do it. The risk there, the gambit always is who's going to stop him. And the Supreme Court said he can only be prosecuted if he's not doing his official duties, pretty much. The question then becomes, is oversight of the White House or decisions with respect to remodeling part of his official duties? Could be. There's an argument there. Other presidents have done some stuff.
Do you think that this is a good idea for this whole project to be finished during Trump's term so that only he was the one who decided it was going to get demolished? Is he going to be the one to oversee it? So would you say there is a real urgency here, or would you say that it is a manufactured through destruction urgency? And what incentive do Congress people have to vote for this, or can the project be left for the next president to clean up?
Okay, so in one of our previous episodes, we talked about whether Trump's a lame duck president. So the urgency in respect to political decisions is only this. The midterms are coming up. There is a chance that the Democrats win the midterms in a landslide and switch the power in the House and maybe the Senate. If that happens, everything comes to a grinding halt. Anything that Trump does or wants to have done through Congress, any kind of money that he wants appropriated or done, it's going to be a real hassle. They're going to bring in testimonies, they're going to do subpoenas, they're going to vet it, they're going to audit it, they're going to pour over every little line and be like, what is this? What are we spending money on? The
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to get the money is right now for Trump. If there was going to be money to build this ballroom, the opportunity to get it made in law, if they pass a bill, is right now. We're in May, so that means May, June, July, August, September, October, November. That's it. Well, I guess
Mm-hmm.
technically until January, right? Because members of Congress are sworn in January of next year. So this is the time. If just from a sheer political pragmatic calculation standpoint, if he wants it done with the maximal amount of money that he could possibly squeeze out of the public coffers to get it done, now is the opportunity, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
that he gets the Republicans in the House and Senate. That's why you see Lindsey Graham proposing it, and they hammer it out. They find some way to get the money into the project, and then they make it happen if it
Mm-hmm.
was going to get done. I understand the political realities that he's looking at because remember, gas prices drive public
Oh
perception of
boy.
the economy. And there is no question that this boondoggle, or whatever you want to call it, this massive operation going on both in attacking Iran, but now in dealing with the fallout of the attack, is that gas prices have gone up. And for the
Mm-hmm.
foreseeable future, it doesn't look like they're just going to go down, right? It's already baked into the cake for at least a few weeks or a month. Because remember, you don't just get oil out of the ground and then get it to the places that refine the oil or make it into gasoline. You have to physically transport it, which can take weeks or months to get from where it is to where it needs to be. And then they have to get the gas from where it is to all over the world, right? All over the planet. And that takes time. And time is not the friend of the political realities right now for the midterms of the Republicans, because already public opinion is not happy that gas prices went up. What was it, 25%? A huge amount, right? Like $1 more than they were in February. That's a lot. If they go up more, which they could, I don't see why they couldn't. If this blockade continues and the time drags on more and more, and the supplies that do exist, the reserve supplies, the backup supplies, whatever existing supplies exist to try and ameliorate the situation. So OPEC's reserves and the strategic petroleum reserves. There's a whole list of amounts of oil that do exist somewhere in the world that, in theory, could still be applied. If those get exhausted and the market realities start really hitting, we're not talking about political calamity. We're talking about political, essentially, Armageddon. Voters are usually just to lay it out in a very simple term, for most elections, usually around half the electorate just sits it out anyways. They just don't
Yeah.
vote.
Even presidential elections, a lot of the time.
Midterms are even worse. Off
Yeah.
year elections are way worse. Primaries are incredibly low turnout. But you know what motivates even the most reticent of voters to turn out for any election and will show up in huge numbers that have not been seen any time before? You know what really motivates people to show up? When they start
Money.
starving, when they
Yeah.
can't get to work, when the price of gas makes it so that it's no longer a momentary discomfort, it's discomfort that they start feeling the real pain. You're seeing this now actually with Spirit Airlines going bankrupt and closing, is that the price of air travel just went up a lot, right? It's supply and demand. If you've got more demand and not as much supply for traveling from somewhere to somewhere else. If you pay attention, which I do when I read what the other companies were saying, the other airlines are saying about the increased fuel prices, they can't just operate with low prices for air travel themselves, right? They have to bake into the cake the price of fuel too. So it's a double whammy. Remember when we were talking about how people on Medicaid who are getting the COVID benefits extended, it felt like they had the rug pulled out from under them right before the 2024 election? Same kind of deal here, that people were told essentially that prices are going to be lower for food, prices are going to be lower for gas, prices are going to be lower day one. That was Trump's promise in the 2024 election. He said, I'm going to bring prices lower. Prices aren't lower. Then he said, I'm going to bring food prices lower. They're not lower. What's going to make the price of everything higher? Jet fuel. Okay. Look, you don't need to be a mathematician or a statistician or anything to look at the graph of the price of jet fuel and go, wow, that looks crazy. If you look at the price of jet fuel, they showed a chart where it was staying pretty stable, pretty constant, and then it just skyrockets. It pretty much doubled in a day. Okay. Now, most of these businesses, they plan years in advance for how they're going to use their assets. Planes are expensive for maintenance schedules, repairs, for all that stuff, right? If the price to do daily things doubles and they have to
Mm-hmm.
have jet fuel to get from point A to point B, all of a sudden it's a huge headache for all these companies. Look, I feel my heart goes out to anyone who bought a plane ticket, right? Uh, what I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious about is if someone bought a plane ticket 6 months ago at a price, is there anything written in the terms of the language like these prices are subject to change if the price of fuel goes up? Because if that exists within the language, I would be not thrilled, right? If you buy a ticket like $500 and then they're like, it's really $800 or it's really
Yeah.
$1,000, right?
Oh boy.
I'm gonna
The old bait and switch.
Yeah, I'm very curious if that is. I don't know if it is. I should read up on that. But what I do
Uh,
know is anybody trying to buy a ticket now are confronted with the very obvious realities that it's expensive, right? So, that at least some people are priced out of the market completely. They will not be able to travel by air. Look, if you were paying $100 for a Spirit airline ticket and there's no more Spirit, and the next highest ticket to get from where you are to where you want to go is $300, not everyone has an extra $200 lying around. If it's $500, definitely not everyone has an extra $400 lying around. The whole selling point of Spirit was it was affordable, it was low cost. People who were frugal could spend very little money relatively to other airlines and be able to get to where they wanted to go. Sure, it was uncomfortable. You're nickel and dimed for all the amenities and all that. But if someone really just wanted to get from one place to another place by air, Spirit allowed them to do that. In the absence of an alternative, all the other airlines have no real incentive to go to the lowest prices that Spirit was offering because there's no market competition. There, none of the other companies want to take the economic hit unless they have to, and they had to lower their prices because Spirit's business model was to have low prices. That's how it was advertised. That's how people. That's what they expected. Other airline companies had to keep prices, at least some of them, low enough to compete in the market. Absent that, I don't blame them. They're going to try to maximize their profits if they can. Why wouldn't they? That's capitalism. Opportunity
sure.
creates a windfall. But I
Right.
do feel bad for the Spirit Airline employees, right? The 18,000 employees who are out of a job because they have a very specialized skill set that doesn't necessarily translate into other jobs. Pilots of planes. If if the other airlines needed more pilots, they'd hire more pilots, right? I would imagine that they already have the pilots they need to fly the planes they have. So it gets a little complicated. But I feel bad for them, right? Because you work for a company that was around for decades. At one point, Spirit Airlines was worth billions of dollars, right? What happened? And we saw what happened. Tariffs and the jet fuel prices skyrocketed, and here we are.
Speaking of gas prices, going back to gas prices, because we that partially it had to do a little bit with the failure of Spirit and going back to the Ukraine war too. Price of oil went up when that happened. Yeah, it's been shocking how much gas prices have gone up. In 2025 and prior to the Iran conflict, oil prices were between $55 and $82 a barrel. And then if we don't consider the first week of March, if we consider that a transition period, they've been between $80 and $120. And currently they are at $95 price of oil, $95 a barrel, which is a high number, but in that range of movement, it actually happens to be on the low end. But I've seen gas prices go up just this week. It used to be at Costco that it was 5.27, and I saw it at 5.50 at Costco this week. So it keeps going up. And I don't know if there was some slack that they're running out of, or if people are just getting used to the higher prices. So I'll tell you what, it's gonna be a December to remember. Yeah, go ahead.
It's the first one you said. So they had reserves in place when they bought the gas and the oil at a certain price. They had enough sitting around that they could continue to charge gas at lower prices. But once that ran out or runs out, they have to pay the existing price of oil. But this is something that isn't talked about as much for the price of oil. There's a price of oil that's listed, so for Brent crude or West Texas Intermediate or whatever. But then there's something called the spot price. Do you know what the spot price is?
Basically.
So the spot price is when they actually buy the oil. And that is actually different than the listed price of the oil. It's much higher because it's based off actual amount someone's willing to pay in that moment to get that oil. And so that one isn't discussed as much, but that is considerably higher than the listed price of oil. And that factors into the cost of gas. Because remember, it's not just a competition between oil producers of where to sell their oil or how to sell their oil or how much oil to get. It's also a competition between people who buy the oil of the immediacy or the urgency of when they need the oil. And the price can go considerably higher. It's called a spot price. And that one's more difficult to pin down for the exact amount because it's so variable in the moment of who wants it the most. And they're outbidding each other to pay for the actual physical product in the moment. And so that's part of this discussion that isn't talked about as much, but bears mentioning because that's how oil actually gets bought is people go to the suppliers and they actually pay a real price that isn't necessarily the price that we hear about. It's much more.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of spot price. For example, this is like the most variable day that I see on March 9th, when people were thinking, oh no, it's going to go to $200 a barrel. On that day, the spot price was anywhere between $80 and $120 for West Texas. So yeah, the spot price can be a lot different. People can pay a different thing than like the market open, market closed, and it's like highly variable day to day. So that's definitely going to be reflected in the total there.
And so what matters in the discussion of oil prices in terms of spot price is the volatility of that spot price. So what the prices that we see, the Brent crude and the West Texas Intermediate, what that does is it affects the range of the spot prices in terms of the high ceiling and the floor of the prices. So if the price of the oil that we see is higher, that means technically the spot price could probably be higher. If the price is lower, that means the spot price is probably going to be lower, right? That it's relative to what the prevailing demand is, or whatever you want to call it, on oil. It's going to be higher. It's based off of the immediate demand, but not always, right? So COVID is the quintessential example, actually, of when prices plummeted, right? Remember I mentioned that prices went into negative territory, that there was a point where people who own the oil literally had to pay other people to store the oil. That it got really bad. That the oil market's very strange, but it's because the demand for it just plummeted when people didn't want to travel by air because they didn't want to get sick. People didn't want to travel in public transportation or in cars or trains or whatever because they didn't want to get sick, right? And we were all self-isolating, quarantining, and doing the social distancing. Look, the strange story right now is the Hanta virus. If you look at that cruise ship story where it's spreading and it's in 9 countries right now, it was the last I read. I mean, let's hope that it gets contained, right? That they do the contact tracing, figure out everybody who came into contact with the people who were infected, and that it gets minimized and it doesn't spread, because it's got a 6 week incubation period, right?
Oh
Somebody
boy.
can seem like they have no symptoms for this very devastating disease for 6 weeks, right? That's a long
Mhm.
time. And if the transmission is human to human,
Yeah, which I heard that it wasn't. It says that it's rare if.
we'll see.
Well, we
That's the big lingering question, right? Is if it's not human to human, how are humans getting it, right? These are always the
mhm.
questions I have. Was it rats on the ship, right? Did someone sniff rat poop? I'm trying to understand if they
Yeah,
didn't
ew.
give it to each other. Exactly, right? Ew. If they didn't give it to each
Yeah.
other, how'd they get it? And those are the questions. That's why it's really important to have a competent and well-funded CDC and Department of Health and Human Services, and maybe don't quit the World Health Organization, right? I'm pretty sure the U.S. quit the WHO,
Wait,
right?
the who?
The WHO, yeah, the World Health Organization.
Yeah, yeah.
If I
Oh
remember
yeah.
correctly, that's one of the things they did early in Trump too. Is we stopped ponying up money for the World Health. It's silly, right? We need
Yeah.
global health initiatives, but whatever. That's an
Right.
aside. It's a real shame that the democratically elected president of the United States abhors the democratic process of just putting forth a proposal to demolish it and then letting bureaucracy do its thing, right? Submitting it to the whatever the committee is that oversees it, going through the whatever the process is, because he sets the standard, right? That everybody else follows, and he's the one who enforces the laws. It sends a terrible message for him to just steamroll everything just because, right? Sometimes the process is the whole thing. It's the whole symbolism, right? It's democracy in action. And he is the democratically elected president of the democracy of the country. And so that, I think, is a different kind of, when we're talking about values and the future, I just think it sends a terrible message to demolish things without actually, thinking through all the consequences, both of the demolishing, but also of the after effects. If you're going to do it, line everything up beforehand. Line up the money for the ballroom beforehand. Get everybody
Mhm.
invested in the project. Don't just do it and then have everybody get invested after the fact. That's for the guy who is all about deal making. He didn't seem to want to
Mhm.
make much of a deal.
United Airlines, on May 4th, a United Airlines jet hit a lamppost, which hit a bakery truck. They have the footage, and you can see the wheel of the plane from the cabin of the truck. And Captain John Cox of NBC News said the pilot had control of the plane, but just got a little bit low because of a gust of wind. What? Is that control? It hit a lamppost, and that's control? It sounds like control isn't enough. I want to know, where's the accountability? And moreover, the guy in the truck was okay, only minor injuries. I call that luck, more luck. How do we even know that pilots are fit to fly? What do we do, Professor Mike? What do we do?
The owner of the truck should sue. The driver should sue for emotional distress, right? You expect that pilots are professionals who don't hit things, right? It's pretty basic. They're not supposed to hit things with their planes.
Mhm.
It's the same difference if someone's driving a car and they hit something. You're not supposed to drive your car into things. So that's where insurance is important. I'm sure they're going to sue the airlines just to replace the truck at a minimum, right? But in terms of the accountability, it's not clear if the pilot's going to get fired or reprimanded or fined in any way. I don't know. But it's certainly unsettling that the plane hit something, right?
Definitely. Yeah. Is the road too close to the runway? That's what I would wonder.
It could be,
Mhm.
right? It could be. It's a possibility. But the question then becomes for me, whose responsibility is it to fix that? Is it the people who put the road there? Do they move the road? Do they lower it? What are the options here? Do they close the road? Or do they
Yeah.
move the airport? Do they move the runway? What are the options here that are the best to remedy the situation in such a way that planes aren't hitting trucks or hitting lampposts, right? That shouldn't happen, period. There's no circumstance I can think of except extreme emergencies where a plane should be hitting a stationary object. It shouldn't
Yeah.
happen, right? Like pilots are supposed to be trained to not hit things. That's the job.
Yeah. Okay, next.
Yeah, what else is there to say other than do better? And let's hope that out of this they figure out a way to make sure that planes aren't hitting trucks and lampposts. It shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, you got to train your pilot, and you'll probably have to move the runway because it's right next to the New Jersey Turnpike. So, from planes hitting trucks to cars hitting people, and of all places in Germany. So, we're talking about mental health, and we're talking about people who are not all right in the head, having access to weapons. Apparently, it happened in Germany too. It was mentioned briefly on NBC, but there's also a Yahoo article. German man held Leipzig car. In other words, he went on a rampage with his car. Dozens were affected and 2 killed. Germany is widely believed not to have speed limits, but they actually have a lot of regulation around the car, and the Autobahn, only certain stretches of it, actually don't have the speed limits. Learning to drive a car takes much longer over there, and you gotta be, last I checked, 18 as opposed to 16 over here to drive a car. Yet even that was not enough to prevent the violence. Cars are weapons of mass destruction by raw death totals. Do you think anything can be done? And are we at the bridge? Are we at some kind of bridge here between regular cars and self-driving cars where we can make a greater effort towards safety in the interim here?
So I do think there's stuff that can be done, but it's going to be pretty extreme. There's a technology that exists to detect collisions between cars. I think it's called LiDAR. But there are technologies that exist to detect. It's the same stuff they're doing with self-driving cars, where they can detect if their car is about to hit something, and the car will come to a halt. It'll stop. It'll stop the
Yeah.
car. So something that I envision could happen in the future. There's 2 paths actually I see. One is that cars are only allowed on fixed roadways. They cannot deviate from those roadways. It's similar to a train where you start in one place and you end in another place, start and stop. You can only park in like specific areas and you can't drive anywhere near people. That is one future. Probably not going to happen, but it could. The other, though, and much more likely, is this collision detection, where what they do is the cars detect automatically if it's about to hit something and stops, period. The driver loses control of the car. A car cannot run people over if the driver cannot actually make the car move. If it's automatically put in place to brake immediately before it gets anywhere near like a living thing or another car. That technology does exist in terms of being able to detect things. It's just it becomes a political question of whether societies will be willing to implement that technology. And that's the big question, I think, in the age of self-driving cars and AI, is how far societies will be willing to go to limit driver autonomy and driver control of vehicles to such a degree that they can override the mechanisms put in place to stop pedestrian deaths and to stop car accidents entirely. Because there is a possibility that if this technology becomes ubiquitous, that almost all car accidents could stop overnight. That if every car
What a great world that would be.
it would be a lot less dangerous. But there's a possibility if this technology became so ubiquitous that it was in everything, except obviously people who have used cars or can't afford the newer upgrades. This is where, again, like governments exist to solve collective action problems. So it's one thing to have an unfunded mandate to tell people you have to get this or you can't drive. It's another thing for the government to subsidize all cars being outfitted with this technology. And if it can't be, replacing those cars like eminent domain. They just buy up a car at fair market price and letting people buy a newer car with that technology in place. There are ways to do this that exist. There's tools in place that can make it happen. It's just a question of political will, of societies wanting to make it happen. And I'm sure at least somewhere in the world, there are places and cultures that will want this. They will want this technology. They will want this to happen because you're right. The amount of deaths that are caused by cars are way too high. If you look at the top 10 causes of death, road entry is up there for the number of people who die every year around the world. If that can be driven down in any significant way, great, right? I don't see anything terrible with that. Does it suck that people will have to not be able to speed and not be able to drive their cars into things and people? No, it doesn't suck. It's great. I think it's wonderful that the ability of people to cause harm with cars would be rapidly diminished. There's way too much freedom people have with being able to drive their cars into things. They shouldn't be able to do it. A car is a tool to transport oneself from one place to another. It should not be able to be turned into a weapon so frequently as it is. People shouldn't be able to use their cars for suicide bombs. They shouldn't be able to use their cars to run people over. And the fact that it happens as much as it does means that there's a real need for societies to figure out how to stop it. The technology does in fact exist to do that, to stop collisions of that nature. So put it in all the cars. That's my opinion.
Picture this. So you have people, sometimes they crash, sometimes they drive drunk, sometimes they drive into things not good. Usually, on most drives, they drive okay. You have AI cars. Most times, they drive perfectly. At times, however, they drive too fast, or they don't let people out, or they get hung up on little errors. How about this? Best of both worlds. You have, and it doesn't have to be permanently a human driver or permanently an AI driver, but you have, let's say it starts out with human driving, computer veto. So you're too close, I'm going to pull this car over now. It's like, oh man, my car pulled over. I was trying to get home from the mini mart, and my car pulled over. Yeah, well, you didn't hit anything. That might be better. Could try it out. Could mandate, if you could get it for $1,000 on a car, I dare say that would be worth it for preventing 30, 40,000 car deaths. Drive safe, trademark.
Yeah, so I'll say this. There's some things that AI and computer systems can do that humans physically cannot. The big thing is seeing in every direction at once. There's a technology that allows cars to see in every direction for collision, but human intervention for things that AI has trouble processing or dealing with, great. Have a human driver there just in case. But the fact is that there are technologies that can meaningfully improve the safety of virtually all cars, and they're not in place right now because of cost and because of a lack of political will to make it happen. It could happen. It could happen overnight. If they really wanted to make it, they're just not. But the one thing I was going to say about the cars is that we're moving into a time where we're going to have flying cars, right? It's not just going to be on the road. There's going to be flying taxis and flying delivery things and flying drones. Lots of things moving all the time. Societies really need to get a handle on removing the human road rage element from any kind of vehicle operation, right? There needs to be a way to tamper down unpredictable human emotions with respect to using vehicles. Because one of the issues with people driving cars is they do have, on occasion, road rage, and they do unpredictable, crazy things like speed really fast, chase people down, run into them, all sorts of dangerous, risky things. If there are technologies that exist that can slow cars down, bring them to a halt, do all sorts of stuff like notify law enforcement if someone's vastly exceeding the speed limit, I don't see a problem, right? People, when they try to learn how to drive a car, have to get a license. They have to get permission from society to do that, which means that driving is a privilege. It's not a right. You're not just allowed to drive, that you have to actually recognize a responsibility towards others when driving. And if somebody proves a demonstrated lack of, I don't know, empathy, lack of caring, lack of regard for their fellow human being while driving, then if there's technologies that it can help limit the worst impulses of humanity, great. Let's do that, right? Our system right now is imperfect. To stop people speeding 100 miles an hour, do you know what we do to try and stop that? We have cops who have to chase them down very fast and give them a ticket. Okay, I prefer a world in which the possibility of even getting to that speed on a public roadway that has a stated speed limit doesn't even happen, right? If the stated speed limit's 60, no car should be able to go over 60 except in an extreme emergency, like a tidal wave or an earthquake or a tornado or something, and that would require an override, right? Some kind of actual emergency override that is recognized and allowed. Right now, there's an awful lot of freedom for people, and then they get fined after the fact. If there's technologies to stop them from breaking the law, period, before the fact, great. I'm in favor because there are a lot of people who die or get seriously mangled or injured from road injuries, and it's preventable. It's not something that we just have to accept as a fact of life, right?
Yeah.
And maybe a mental health check before you can start the engine.
No, I don't know about that, but certainly we've talked about this before that people with dementia or who are starting to develop dementia, they're not regularly tested before they're allowed to get behind the wheel of a car. And then we hear these stories of people driving into grocery stores, driving into bakeries, driving into walls, driving into crowds of people because they can't discern reality, right? They can't discern where they are from where they're going. And that's
Yeah.
a problem, right? So if there's tools in place or technologies in place that can serve as an emergency braking mechanism to save people from getting run over by a car by somebody who's
Yeah.
lost possession of their senses for whatever reason. The only downside I really see is that the systems could be hacked, right? That
Oh, yeah.
some external force could gain control of the car, and then that would be a real problem.
But if it's drive safe TM, then the worst they could do is just stop the people from driving, which would be darn annoying, but it also, if it's just, hey, pull over this car now.
It's a very utilitarian thing. That momentary discomfort of having to sit
Exactly.
and wait is it's not even on the same level compared to 10 people getting run over by a car or something, right? The moral calculus isn't even close. Somebody having to sit around and wait for a few minutes or an hour or whatever
Yeah.
sucks. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully it wouldn't.
You
Hopefully
know,
it wouldn't be that slow.
make them go
Yeah.
to the funerals of everybody who got run over by a car and sit through
Yeah.
and watch all the crying families and tell them that
Yeah.
this could have been prevented, and then ask them if waiting that 30 minutes or an hour was worse than going to all those funerals and seeing all those grieving families. Like,
If your car pulls over 10 or even 100 times, or I would dare say more, that's better than if you get run over. Or if worse, yeah, I think it would be worse, if you run over one person. Yeah, I would say so. So, remaining in Auf Deutschland, or not remaining, as the case may be, the U.S. is set to pull some troops out of Germany. NBC reports on May 1st. It's not that many troops, it's 5,000, but Trump's pulling them out of Germany. What does it mean for the alliance? Is it wise with a land war in Europe? And is NATO fracturing, or are European members stepping up?
okay, so the first answer, alliance is still there. We benefit as much as they benefit from it existing. So unless we unilaterally pull out literally everything from all European countries and Canada, the U.S. is still part of the alliance. I don't even know if Trump can unilaterally pull the U.S. out of NATO. I think it needs the Senate to vote on it too.
Yeah.
The second one, is it wise with a land war in Europe? No, it's a terrible idea. NATO exists to protect us just as much as it exists to protect Europe. And it's an awful idea to change the number of troops we have there because it's meant to protect us as well, right? We've talked about this. It's meant as a tripwire, as a barricade, a buffer between the US and the dangerous parts of the world, the scary parts of the world. In this instance, Russia and its current invasion of Ukraine, right? That could spiral out of control, but it's contained to Ukraine because of NATO. If NATO didn't exist, Russia could start gobbling up all the other little countries around Ukraine. And what's to stop it, right? Russia's a giant war machine, and these little countries aren't. And so Russia could just start omnoming them, to just start eating up all the little countries. Have you ever
Hungry
seen
Russia.
Sure. Have you ever seen the movie Mortal Engines or read the book of them?
I don't think so.
Okay. The premise of it is there's giant roving cities that gobble up little towns that are
Oof.
yeah. Anytime I think of Russia, it's a giant city gobbling up all the little cities for parts, right? Right now, the World War III is being stopped because of NATO. If that didn't exist, Russia could quite seriously just keep going until it meets someone who stops them. In the case of someone who stops them, it would be France, it would be the UK, or it would be Germany. Are probably the only countries, really, in my opinion, that have any chance of holding their own against Russia right now. That's it, right? And all of Europe. Yeah, NATO is important.
Don't forget Canada.
Yeah, but Canada's far away for a land war in Europe, right?
Okay.
Who actually has the power in Europe to stop Russia? It would be France, it would be Germany, it would be UK. That's it. They're the ones. And so everybody else, they're just eaten up by Russia. It turned into some puppet state. The way you stop that is NATO. This is a terrible idea. It was dumb for the Chancellor of Germany to embarrass the U.S. on the international stage in that way, by saying that Iran humiliated. Keep it to yourself. Keep some thoughts just need to be in the little. They don't need to be public thoughts. You keep them in your brain, right? It's not very diplomatic to try and talk shit about. Sorry, perspective. It's not the smartest thing when you really need the United States to hold up the NATO alliance to say mean things about the United States. Just don't say it, right? Just accept the help and move on, right? Like, not everything needs to be said. But it's also dumb on Trump's part to take any troops out of Europe. If anything, we should be strengthening our position to make sure, again, that Russia is deterred from invading anywhere other than Ukraine. And it needs to be kicked out of Russia of Ukraine. That's bad too. It's aggression, pure and simple. It's bad. It shouldn't be gobbling up Ukraine. The Ukrainians have a right to have their own country. That's not Russia.
Right. Yes, states must be inviolate within their borders.
And then is NATO fracturing? No, because Trump didn't say he's taking all the troops out. Look, we will know if the U.S. is out of NATO because we'll be gone, right? Right now, the troops are in Europe because of NATO. If that day arrives that we're suddenly not part of NATO, what will happen will be pretty dramatic. We will leave virtually all European countries. There will be no troops stationed at any bases anywhere in Europe. Will it happen? I am super skeptical because it serves the United States' interests and national security to have those bases in Europe, because otherwise our ability to travel by plane to some places will take way more time. Not close. It will take way more time. And that's not a great idea if you're an international global superpower. You need the ability to get from point A to point B to point C to point D without huge amounts of fuel refueling and all sorts of problems of getting to places. We need Europe just as much as Europe needs us. Technically, Europe needs us more because, again, they don't have huge militaries to defend them. We do. We have the technology. We have the means. They need us, but we need them too. Because I am skeptical that the American people want to fight World War III against Russia and China, because that would suck so much, right? Of just constant fighting and it would just really suck. You think the oil situation's bad now, wait until the price of everything doubles and there's rationing. That would suck so much. It would be bad.
Previously, America was protected by two great oceans. But the oceans are angry now, and just the world's connected. And it's not just us in the backyard anymore. It's one world family, and we got to participate in it. And NATO lives to hopefully not fight another day, but if we need to, it's there. Mondays with Mike.